everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the cartoonist behind Amulet Book 9, Wave Rider, the final book to the just completed Amulet series at Scholastic Graphix. It's Kazu Kibuishi. Thanks for coming on, Kazu.
Thanks, David. Glad to be here.
We're recording this on Monday, February 12th, just a little less than a week into a book tour you're doing to promote the latest release. How's it feeling to officially be done and to have the final Amulet story out there?
Good. I'm glad that I've completed one of these things.
Yeah.
I think, there's like this feeling like, I better make sure nothing happens to me before I get to complete this one, at least this one big project. And I'm glad to have ended at least one. So my goal, of course, is to do more,
right,
and continue. And I'm excited about the prospect of doing something that I'm essentially beginning in my adult life and not as a kid.
When did you start Amulet? I know the book series started on January 1st, 2008, so it was 16 years. But I think you started in like 1997. So how old were you when you started Amulet?
I guess I was 19 when I started working on this. So I was a teenager. A lot hasn't changed since then. Emily and Navin are a little bigger. The characters are generally all there. It looks a lot better than it would have had I done it in college. But it was in college when I read Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind. And I thought, wow, I really want to do something like this. And I want to do something like Bone by Jeff Smith. I gave it a shot. I thought I might be good enough, and I was not.
And that's why there was a 11-year gap in between you first starting on it and when it was actually released at Scholastic Graphix. You had to build up your skills and figure out what it really was.
Actually, it wasn't skill. It would have looked okay. It would have looked different. I just didn't have life experience. I was just a kid. I was a kid who liked stories with life experience in them. I was an Akira Kurosawa fan. I was a Krzysztof Kieslowski fan. I liked movies and books that felt like they were written by somebody who knew what they were talking about. And I could clearly tell that when I was making my book for the first time, I didn't know what I was talking about. So that meant I had to just park it, go do something else for a while, and then take what I've learned and then bring it back to the book.
It seems like one of the things you had to do is just live life. I mean, that's one of the things when I talk to people who are creatives, who make things for a living, one of the things that comes up is a big thing that you need to be doing is like, it's not just about, if you make comics, it's not just about reading comics. It's about reading other things, watching films, watching whatever, experiencing life, doing all these things, whatever inputs you need to like help figure out who you are as a person and what your perspective is. I imagine that was a lot of what you were doing in between those 2 points.
Yeah, I had to get a job real quick right out of college because my parents were in some financial trouble that I didn't know about at the time that I was at UC Santa Barbara. And when I found out, I immediately just looked for the highest paying gig, and I became a graphic designer for a while. I did that for the first year out of college. I was working as a graphic designer for a website, a startup in Santa Barbara. And I was working for a former movie producer and literary agent, David Obst. He's the producer of Revenge of the Nerds.
Nice.
And he was the book agent for Woodward and Bernstein for All the President's Men. So if anybody wants, there's a connection between Revenge of the Nerds and All the President's Men and Watergate.
That is really fascinating.
He's also the subject of Almost Famous. And he was also he was also married to the producer of Sleepless in Seattle and Interstellar and Gravity, Linda.
This is like the single most interesting person that's ever existed.
He is actually one of the most interesting people I've ever known. And it's funny because he wrote a biography that he gave to me, and I never actually all that time I didn't read it until recently. And it was really good. Too Good to Be Forgotten is what it was called. And he's a funny guy, really funny, interesting person. And it kind of just by chance, by working with him, he became a very important person in my life, actually. I should probably reach out to David because the things he said to me really stuck with me. It's probably why he gets into such important and weird and big cultural moments. But when I was working for him, he found out that I drew cartoons. And I was just doing graphic design work. And so I did a commission for him. He asked me to do a piece. So I drew something for him. I brought it to his house and we sat there by his pool and he looked at it and he was like, he looked kind of perplexed. He looked at it and it was this really elaborate drawing. And he's like, this is amazing. Like, he's like, what are you doing here? Like, what are you doing working for me? And I said, well, I need a job. I need to make a living. I got to support my parents and my family and everything. And I told him like nobody pays for this, but except maybe you. I mean, I didn't think anybody would pay me well enough doing cartoons that's something I could do for a living. And so he just kind of shook his head and he just said, okay, well, you do what you do. And he left it at that. He didn't like elaborate or anything like that. He left me with this, you do what you do. And then I just chewed on that for a long time. I just kind of thought about it and I took it to mean that, you may be a person who thinks that you're going to do something later in your life. Like, I'm working towards this thing. I'm going to do this thing. I think everybody has this dream they're moving towards the thing that they are supposed to do. When in fact, when they're on that journey to that place, that imaginary place in their mind, they are becoming the thing and the person that they will always be. They're doing whatever they're doing in the moment is who they will be. And so I took that with me as I started working on stuff to mean that I can't deviate from whatever path I choose to take. And then when I started doing comics, I was locked in that it didn't matter if there was money, an opportunity, a publisher or whatever. I didn't care what was down the road and nothing was conditional. It was an entirely unconditional decision to do what I do. And if I made money, great. If I didn't, great. I don't care. It didn't matter. So that's how I started when I started working on Daisy Cutter and Flight and Copper and Amulet. I was just driven to do comics and had no interest in doing anything else.
Because you do what you do.
You do what you do. Yeah.
That is one of those 5-word loaded statements that doesn't sound much out of context, but when you hear it, it's like, I don't know, I just imagine, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie I Heart Huckabees. There's this one line in it that repeats through Jude Law's head and it actually makes him sick at one point. And it's like, it's one of those things that I think would just stick with you because you're just like processing, what does this mean? Like, oh, and once you finally understand it, you're like, I need to do what I do. And
yeah,
I do think it's interesting to think about that through the context of your career because, you mentioned Flight. Like, Flight was where I first discovered your work. And Flight wasn't, for listeners that don't know, was an anthology series it started Image, correct?
It did, yeah. The one was Image.
And so it was like a collection of all these young cartoonists who were amazing. And if you ever like look through it, you're just like, oh, wait, this is like a tour of all the best talent today. And it was the type of thing that doesn't really exist or didn't really exist before then. And that's one of the interesting things I think is, and before we get much further, I'm going to give a quick synopsis of Amulet, which is tough to do because it's 9 graphic novels long and has evolved a lot since it launched in 2008. But here's how Wikipedia describes it. Amulet follows the adventures of Emily, a young girl who discovers a sentient and autonomous magical circular amulet in her great-grandfather's house and consequently is tasked with protecting an entirely new world from a ruler known as the Elf King. That barely covers any of it, but it evolves a lot. That's the point. But one of the things I wanted to bring up in relation to you do what you do and like, kind of the environment you found yourself in when you were drawing that fateful commission is when you first started, it wasn't just that you were different or that the world was different. The comics environment was completely different. 1997, Scholastic Graphix didn't exist. It wouldn't exist for 8 years. And it wasn't until 2005 that came in. And even then, graphics was less than 3 years old when the first book hit. Amulet has basically run parallel to the rise of that space becoming dominant. How much does it feel the world of comics has changed since you started and the opportunities for somebody like you?
I guess it does run parallel with essentially the rise of the Flight anthology. The Flight anthology, a lot of people will give me credit for that, and I kind of feel like I was just there in a moment, and I just recognized that these people were here in that moment with me, and we all recognized that in each other, and so we just sat and had fun drawing cartoons together, and it was a really pleasant experience. I imagine that's what it was like for people who work on certain movies that just had a magical feel to it in the end. or or like music that that resonates with a lot of people. There are just these moments you can't just recreate it or create it yourself. You can't generate it. You're just in it, like you're riding a wave. And I guess we could relate that to Wave Rider, Amulet Wave Rider. But that's the idea, is that you don't have control of those moments. But you can recognize that you could surf them. And I'm a surfer, so I tended to surf it, surf that wave. So yeah, I've heard this from a lot of people. They recognize that. Yeah, it looked like I was right there at the start, but I think we were all there. There was this group. And Jeff Smith, I think, is probably one of the keystones for that movement. And if it wasn't for Jeff, really, I think a lot of us wouldn't have known to do this at the scale that we're working on them, on these books. So I followed Jeff through the door in a lot of ways. Stan Sakai as well. I would put Stan up there. I'd say Stan Sakai, Sergio, just because of his presence in the world of things. Sergio Aragonis, Jeff Smith. And of course, Art Spiegelman and Frank Miller and those guys, and Neil Gaiman. I think they all had a lot to do with it as well. But yeah, when I started, I didn't think of this as a job. I just thought I was going to do this, and then I was going to direct a movie or something, and just stay in the animation industry, which is where I was when I started Flight.
Mm-hmm. I mean, but the interesting way, like going back to Amulet, like Amulet is. It's a kind of a fascinating book in a lot of ways, because it seems like there's a lot of different directions it could have gone, because at least as far as what I understand, it kind of started as a single book, and then it became 5 books, and then it became 7 books, and then it became 9 books. And it's a broad spectrum of results. And I am interested in, so when you were getting started, when the Stone Keeper was first coming into your mind's eye and everything like that, how much of the story did you have sketched out from the beginning, and how close did your ending come to that original vision?
The ending is exactly the same, actually. That was one of the few things that I didn't have to change, and that was nice.
You mean like the final pages, not like the book itself?
Yeah, not the final Wave Rider book. I wouldn't have known any of those. A lot of those characters existed. I just knew where it would end, and it kind of ends at the beginning. And so I always assumed that would be the case. I even let Scholastic know a long time ago, because they were wondering if I was just unfurling random stuff. They were like, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I said, "I know where I'm going. I know where it ends." And I told them the ending, and they said, "Oh, that sounds nice." And that's and I told Jason a long time ago, my intention was to have giant robots in space battles and stuff like it. It was gonna feel like Gundam or something by the end, and he didn't believe me. Because he was working on the book at book 2, but so there are things that I intended to do, and I did them, but I want to have fun writing these things, so I don't lock myself down on the story too much. I try to leave it open for whatever I'm interested in when I'm working on that book, and allowing the story to move in that direction a little bit.
I imagine that's a huge part of it, is just being flexible and listening to yourself when something seems like it's right. Like maybe this character is popping for you in a way that you didn't expect. Then next thing you know, that can kind of move in a different direction. Or if I don't know, I'm trying to think of it like Vigo Light. Like that's a character I could absolutely imagine having expanded quite a bit throughout the series. Because by the end, he's like an enormously consequential character. But he doesn't show up until the 4th or 5th book?
The 4th book, yeah.
4th book, yeah. And that's really fascinating. And so it's like, you could be like, okay, I'm going to do this cool book with, this young girl and this like swashbuckling fox and then her like brother and all this stuff like that. But then as you introduce more characters, next thing you know, you're starting to understand that your book is something different than you originally expected. And while the end result is the same, maybe your path getting there isn't.
Yeah. I wanted to make something that felt like a Miyazaki film, because when I get together with all my director and story artist friends, before we were story artists or directors or whatever, we were in the film industry, just having Asian food in East LA and just on late nights just talking shop about story. We often come to Miyazaki's work with this reverence and perplexed feeling about his stuff. Because what it is about his work that is so unique is that he's able to craft something that feels like it is organic in the middle of a massive production. There aren't that many people who can command that kind of organic quality on a big group project. In fact, he may be the only one that can.
Yeah.
It's at that scale anyway of content creation, because he's also drawing this thing. He's like everything. Without Miyazaki, you can't do any of it. Like you cannot recreate what he does, and that's kind of why he has to keep coming out of retirement, right?
Yeah.
Essentially to keep his studio alive. So all of us, we're trying to find some way to make something like that, and we're having to do it within the bounds of like corporate structures and things like that. And so I came to comics in large part because I wanted to have a space that allowed me to do it. And before I worked on Amulet, I was going to take it to animation studios in different places. I was actually directing a movie at Disney prior to this. I was like 22, 23 years old, working on a project called Let's Get Francis that I pitched to a bunch of studios. And there were two studios that were interested in working with us, and that was Illumination Entertainment and Disney. At the time, Illumination was not what it is now. I feel like that Chris Meledandri and his crew have done a phenomenal job of figuring out how to operate in the space in a way that a lot of other people could not figure out. And I kind of wish we did work with them. However, that means my life probably would have taken a very different trajectory.
Very different. Yeah.
Illumination being the creators of Despicable Me and that whole Minions franchise, right?
Really quick, I just want to, this is a complete aside, but I think it's funny anytime I hear the word Illumination, regardless of whether or not it's contextualized by that production company, I hear a Minion saying it in my head, which is incredible branding.
Yeah, incredible branding, right? Yeah, they've done a fantastic job of finding a franchise that is their cornerstone and their identity. And that's something that I think Disney's actually kind of losing the ability to do it right now. I think they can't find their footing right now, and they're trying to figure it out. But yeah, anyway, back then I was working on this film for Disney, and it was also another time of identity, like soul searching for the company. It was just as Katzenberg had left to do DreamWorks, and it was Eisner was like moving. He got ousted at that time, Michael Eisner, and there was like a new head of the studio, David Staten, who was coming up from all the sequel, the straight to video sequels. He was being put in charge of the whole studio. And everything, and it was turmoil. It was just madness. And in the middle of the madness, they picked up my film, this thing that I was working on with a couple of my friends. And as excited as this group was, my group of friends, I was very aware of film history and the studios, how these things would go. And I was almost 100% sure that ours was going to just get shelved.
Right.
We were just not positioned in a place where it mattered for us to finish it. And it, it just, I was like, even in the halls looking at American Dog, project by Chris Sanders that would become Bolt. And I just knew at that point that Chris had left. So, so I knew that there was so much turnaround, like there was so much stuff going on that this is not going to happen. And I just wanted to learn to tell a story, and I wanted an audience to see it. And I didn't want to have an executive tell me what to do. I wanted a kid who actually consumes the product tell me what to do, because they're ultimately the most important part of the whole chain. Is the end user, and is the person who's going to actually bring it into their lives, And we were, and in the animation studios, we're not listening to kids. Most people didn't have kids. I didn't. I was young. I was super young. But yeah, I just thought, okay, well, if they're not going to let me work here, I'm not going to learn. I'm not going to get any better. So I got to go someplace where I can work. And in comics, it was also a disaster. The whole field was a mess. And to me, I saw it as fertile real estate, because there was nobody to tell me what to do, because nothing seemed to matter to anybody.
Yeah.
Because it was like Mad Max out there, It was just a desolate wasteland. And even my friends, when they saw me go into comics at that time, they thought I was crazy. They said, "What are you doing? Like, we're getting free lunches, and there's so much money in animation right now. 3D is just now blossoming, and you're gonna go there where like nobody's there." And I thought, that's exactly why I'm going. And if somebody doesn't make something for young people who go to that space, then nobody will be there in the future. And so that's when I made Amulet. And I remember a lot of people getting mad at me, actually, moving from Flight and Daisy Cutter to Amulet in the comic space. I still go to Comic Cons with people asking me, "Oh, you're the Flight guy." This is New York Comic Con just this past year. You're oh yeah. Oh, Kazu, it's so good to see you. It's been so long. You were working on Flight, right? What happened to all that?
Oh my God.
And he asked me, like, are you still working on stuff?
Oh boy.
And I tell them, and they're very kind. These are friends. These are nice people. And I tell them, like, yeah, I've been working on something called Amulet. I'm working on Amulet for like almost 20 years, 15. It's been out for 15 years. I've been working on it for 20 with Scholastic. So yeah, I said it's doing all right, and we would talk, and it was just like two totally different worlds. And I knew that, like, when I went into comics, that would be the case.
I do think that's one of the interesting things about comics. I've talked to people that, let's say, come from like the indie alternative world and then go and work for like Marvel or DC or something like that. And there can be this perception that you've entered a world we cannot follow you to, or like not that you've sold out, but it's just like, you're not one of us right now. Maybe when you come back, you'll be one of us. And I'm not saying that that's the case, but it is interesting how there can be that segmentation. But so, the book starts. One of the things I thought was really interesting, this is how deep of a nerd I am. In the back of Wave Rider, one of the things I really wanted to ask about was in your extra special thanks section, because you wrote about David Saylor. David Saylor is the person behind Scholastic Graphix and like the head there. And you said, when the series was published to less fanfare than I expected, he let me know that this would be a long journey and help me maintain my focus. That, I think, really speaks to just how different the world was back then, though, is that Amulet, I didn't actually know that Amulet did not start to significant fanfare, because now we look at it, it's kind of like, it's not to the same degree, but it's like when Jeff Smith started Bone. Jeff Smith was self-publishing at Cartoon Books, and it was this black and white curiosity that came out, and it was great, but eventually it went to Disney Adventures, and eventually, he finished it by himself, and then it came out in that one volume edition at Scholastic Graphix, and it exploded. I think that's one of the things that people don't understand in retrospect, is like they hear Amulet and they think of this series that has sold millions of copies, but it sounds like part of the reason why it became one book and then 5 book and then 7 book and then 9 books is, to some degree, it just kind of grew into something that maybe you didn't expect. Is that the case?
No, I always expected it to succeed.
Oh my God. Well,
I did actually.
You're a prognosticator. Amazing.
Well, no, I could see it was easy to see the future if you've been to Japan.
Yeah. Sure.
It was easy to see the future if you've been anywhere in Europe or South America, and you look at comics elsewhere and the way it's easy to see the future if you look at Peanuts. If you look at our syndicated comics and the success of those, like, it was very easy to see that something could succeed at a very high level. It would just be a matter of being steady enough that it would change the popular perception that, it can or can't be done. It just took longer than I thought, honestly, for all of this to matriculate, but it's happening now, and we're in a new stage where we're establishing a tradition. And that is like what everyone is fighting about right now. Is it art comics? Is it superheroes? Is it, when people say graphic novels these days, I hear them say it's a genre, and that is not true. It's a medium. And within the medium, there are many genres. Like, my books are not the same as Raina Telgemeier's books. They're in two totally different genres. Like, that her books are, for a very particular audience, and my books are for a very particular audience. If there's anybody in my genre, it's Amy, my wife, and it's Jeff Smith, and now, like, one of my former assistants, Tim Probert, is doing Lightfall. I would heavily recommend people look at that, so, but yeah, it's we're going to get to a place where there's enough of these books that we can speak of genre within the context, without involving the medium, but there's just not enough of them right now.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Looking for the right place to read digital comics? You can find it at Omnibus. Omnibus is a modern digital comic book store and reader app carrying your favorite single issues, volumes, and omnibuses, all day and date. It's just like a comic shop where you pay per book, but digital. Omnibus has even upped its game lately, as they've added a web reader in store on top of its iPad version, with iPhone and Android coming soon. Looking for an ideal digital comic store, but with an excellent shopping and reading experience, one that uses novel discovery features to help fans find their next new favorite book, and one that features many of the best comics and publishers in comics today, including publishers like Image, Boom, Dark Horse, and more? You can find all that on Omnibus. Visit the web store or download the app today at omnibus.app. And now, back to the show. I mean, it's getting there. I mean, that's one of the funny things is like, I mean, even somebody who was kind of an architectural person to this environment, Mark Siegel, the person who started First Second, he did, I don't know if you ever read Five Worlds, that series that he did with, I think it was his brother, and then a trio of artists in Boya Sun and Xantha Bume, and oh my God, I'm forgetting the third person's name. But that is a wonderful series that has just incredible art, and it really reminds me in a lot of ways of Amulet and Bone and everything, all the ones you're talking about, where it has this like fantasy epic type thing going on. But
Five Worlds, I believe it's his daughter. It might be his daughter that he works with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and actually, I have quotes on the book. So I'm quite involved with Mark, because Mark and I go way back. He actually sent me I was one of the first people he sent his plan for First Second too. Back when I did the fight, he sent me a PDF it said First Second, his plan for this thing. There was no logo yet, and he just wanted to get some notes. So he and I have been friends for a long time, and I'm glad he's in the space. He's one of the guys who's really building up a pillar in this world of graphic novels.
Absolutely, I totally agree. But in regards to getting a little into Wave Rider in specific, and I'll do my best to avoid spoilers, but this is a terrible thing to start a question with, but I have this vague memory of something you had posted on Twitter a long time ago in the midst of making Wave Rider, where I seem to recall you saying something about reworking part of the final book for one reason or another. And I might be wrong, but obviously it was a 6-year gap between books, so there was a lot of opportunity for tweaks. But how did Book 9 Wave Rider change over its development? Like, were there any significant adjustments to the story as you put it together? Because, I mean, famously, some very big world events happened during that, so I imagine mentally you went through a lot in the process of developing it.
Every book is changing as it goes, because I did choose to do graphic novels so I can take on the Miyazaki method, which is sort of like just laying the rails down, before the steam engine, rolls right on top of it, so it feels fresh.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I just even though I was essentially trained as a screenwriter, because I went to film school, and most of that was screenwriting, really. I don't write out everything as I make them when I'm making a graphic novel.
Interesting.
Even though I think I could do it that way, I could write it and then produce it later. I prefer to do these books with that kind of improvisational jazz music playing type of thing, because we just don't have enough creators that have an opportunity to do such things anywhere outside of maybe a novel. Novels, this is why I think a lot of movies are made off of novels, because interesting things can happen there, because they don't have to get approval all the time. Maybe unless their editor is on their case all the time, they can just make stuff and it just arrives in this raw form, and people, I think, like the humanity of that. And that's something that's often missing in production work, because everything goes through so many hands. And if you're doing a comic book, it's oftentimes like in the hands of 2 or 3 or 4 people. But in the case of books like Amulet and Rima, our books, we're drawing and writing and coloring our own stuff. So you do have the creator's hand in everything. Like Amy and I think about the colors as music. And so when we have somebody who comes in to work with us, they really have to know us to make content that we can approve of, that we can operate with, because they're making music with us. So and I think a lot of people don't think of the colors that way, but yeah, and I think I'm going off a track. I have no idea.
No, you're doing the jazz improvisational thing again. That's good.
Exactly.
I did want to ask about your process though. So when you sit down to work on Book 9 on Wave Rider.
Uh-huh.
What is your process for putting that together? Because I conceptually know what the jazz improvisational approach is like, but does that mean that your art first, like you start kind of laying things out and figuring it out there? Like, what is your process for kind of putting the entire, or do you start with an outline? Like, how do you get from point A to point B?
Yeah, I make outlines for my publisher, but not for myself.
Okay.
I break up every one of my graphic novels into about 16 scenes, and those scenes are each of those scenes are like a comic book, and about they're about 16 to 20 pages in length or less. There could be a short one, it could be 8 pages or something. It's like making a bunch of short films that will eventually make one big film. And the reason I do that is that your brain cannot contain everything that a graphic novel requires all at once. I tried to do Amulet from 1 to 200 one time, the first book, and it just kept breaking me. It was frustrating because I knew that if I did this well, then I'm going to have to do this process over and over again. And I just didn't look forward to it. It actually took Jeff Smith looking at it and saying, admitting, I mean, I could tell in his voice that, he knew that it wasn't very good at the time. And I knew it wasn't good. So he came in and helped me, and he looked at it and he said, hey, some of it's really good, man. And that's all I needed to hear. I thought, yeah, you know what? I do agree with that. I do think that there are elements that are good. So what elements are good? And I kept all of those elements, and I just took away everything that didn't work. And then I started compiling new scenes to fill in the spaces that were missing. And now that I know, it's like a math equation. Now that I know that we're going to have to be here and we're starting here and there's this empty space, what do I put in that space? Then I can enter in I could put extra energy into that space and fill it up. And then you have these 3 scenes now that seem kind of made by multiple hands in a way, because it's me in different times. It's not just me doing a stream of consciousness straight line through to the end. It's constructed, it's thought through. And that's how my process came about. So now I break every book up into a dozen to 16 sequences, and I only think about each individual sequence on its own. And I have a hypothesis that it would, if I do these particular 16 sequences, that it will make an album, like a music album that works. Then I just go ahead and start making those songs, and then hoping that album comes together. And sometimes the songs get rearranged, and sometimes the songs change and get swapped out. And I learned a lot of that through Flight, because I was editing an anthology, and I had to make it seem like we're all working together when that was not always the case. It had to feel musical all the way throughout, and I had to find which stories worked well before and after other stories. And it just, there was a feeling that one person had helped guide you through it.
I do think it's interesting. There's a bunch of things I want to say about that. But one thing, first off, I just want to say, I do think you can actually kind of see the scenes in the colors of the pages, because there's sections that have black backgrounds instead of white backgrounds and stuff like that, or gutters, excuse me. And so that kind of, you can actually kind of see that. But what you're saying kind of reminds me of, do you know Cliff Chang at all?
I'm sure I met Cliff, but I know of his work, but I don't know Cliff.
Talking to him about Paper Girls, the comic he did with Brian K. Vaughan and Matt Wilson and, oh my God, Jerry K. Fletcher. And the thing that was interesting about that is he kind of project managed that to some degree. He was the artist, but he was also kind of the project manager. I feel like to some degree, part of the reason why he was able to do that was because he had worked in editorial before, and he was able to kind of see the totality of it rather than just the individual elements. And it kind of sounds like that's what Flight was for you, is it kind of recontextualized your brain and helped you create this project manager side of your brain that wasn't just writer or artist. It was, I can see the whole there and how these parts fit together.
Yeah, when you edit a book, you have to take what you're given. You have what you have. And there isn't a lot you can do. There's, most of it you have to just trust the people the biggest creative decision an editor has is the choosing their team. And then from then on, I believe the best thing to do is just trust them 100%, and then just wait until everything comes in, and then do what you can in all these little ways. And then you're in the process of putting stuff together. There's a wish fulfillment aspect of it, where you're like, oh man, I wish I had this. I wish I had that. I wish that it just I just need a little more of this, so that when I go back into my books, it does play out, where I'm like, oh yeah, that's the part. That's what I would need. I need this to construct that. So a lot of people, a lot of top selling authors in my field now, in middle grade fiction or just juvenile fiction in general, they are have started as editors. Many of them have, and that includes the creator of Wings of Fire, Tui Sutherland, Anne Martin, creator of Babysitter's Club, Bob Stein, who creates Goosebumps. They were all editors prior to being authors.
Yeah. I mean, Mark Siegel again, another good example.
Yeah, David Levithan at Scholastic. There's quite a few actually.
I do think it's interesting hearing you talk about kind of splitting it up into scenes and kind of how you think about it musically. But the funny thing is, going back to Jeff Smith, he was the one who kind of set you on that path and kind of figuring that out.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because in a lot of ways, it's almost sounds like you kind of have to break it down to where you're thinking about it almost like a single issue for a comic book form, which is what Jeff did, which is in a lot of ways probably the difference in your creative process is he was thinking in smaller chunks while you were initially trying to think big, and he kind of pushed you towards thinking small again.
Yeah, I think but it's like a matter of like practicality. I think a brain can't handle like the complex narrative that an entire graphic novel, requires. The creation of one that I think is fulfilling. There are a lot of graphic novels that I see. If I had to be of a critical mind, I think are done kind of like storyboards for animation, and it just feels empty to me. Like, not that it doesn't mean much, but it's like they have a very simple tune that they're running through for 200 pages to fill it, and I think the readers can sense that too. They sense that they're not getting a symphony and they're not getting an album. They're getting one long song, because they did it that way.
Right.
Yeah. So, it's really a function of how do we get information to be compressed? Because I believe that comics' greatest value is saving people time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, why do you say that?
I believe that you could some young reader is going to read Amulet in like the whole thing in the span of an afternoon. And maybe the whole day, but they're gonna remember Amulet as being as big, maybe even bigger than something like Lord of the Rings or the Chronicles of Narnia. I think in their mind, the world and the story and the elements of it are just as deep and as big as those things. And I think that that's due to comics' ability to compress information. It's like a really good JPEG.
Yeah.
We're compressing, we're saving people the time that it would take to like read a very rich tapestry of text and distilling it into its most basic elements in picture form and activating their minds to actually create all that text in their minds, and they get the same experience in a fraction of the time. And in an age like this, when information is flying all over the place, especially for young kids who, for them, like a cell phone or a computer, digital technology it's like trees to them. They just were there.
Yeah.
To us, like when we were kids, they're like trees are nature, but those trees were planted. Somebody made them. It's not like they just existed. A lot of times forests were even planted by civilizations that came before. And that was city building back in the day,
And it was just always there for them.
Yeah, but it was so they're just like, it's just here. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, comics can help them sort that out.
I do think it's interesting too, because you're talking about how they could read it in the span of an afternoon. And I think sometimes, and I understand this, like sometimes people can it can feel bad that you worked on something for like a year and a half or 2 years and somebody reads the whole thing in an hour. And like, that's a complicated feeling. But the thing about it is I think that that's one of the things that makes comics accessible and it makes it rereadable, is that like people will engage in those worlds. I mean, think about I wonder how many people, there's no way to figure this out, but I wonder how many people every time a new Amulet book came out read the entire series beforehand. I bet a lot of people read like the first 8 volumes before Wave Rider hit because they wanted to make sure that they're like right in the right mindset. And like, if there isn't 8 novels, if like you're trying to read like all the Dune books before the new one came out, you'd be like, well, I got to dedicate the next 6 months of my life because that's what it's going to be.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And like Jeff Smith, I think of Amulet as one big book. Really, it is like a visual novel That's just one novel. But no one's going to buy or no one's going to make a 2,500, 3,000 page tome and just like send it out there. That just doesn't fit any market at all. So the vision is the same, and this is the way we would be able to pass that vision on to others is through volumes. And in this case, 9 volumes in both series.
Is there a part of you that wants your own one volume edition?
No, it wouldn't work with Amulet. I think it would break.
I was trying to think about that. It would be, I don't know how long Bone is, but I feel like Amulet is like at least several hundred pages longer, and that's already pushing it.
It is, yeah. I think Bone. I think each book is about 128 pages, and in the case of Amulet, it's like the last book was 256. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be very challenging for a printer.
Somebody's going to do their own like self-binding of the entire series, and it is going to be just a monster. But
Yeah, they should just get the box set. They should just get the box set.
yeah, the box set, it's quite nice. See, this is one of the things I think is interesting. I mean, it's the same way with anything, but I bet like with Bone, it's like every single release that Jeff had brought on a new type of reader and a new generation of reader. And the box set is probably going to do the same thing for Amulet. There's some people who are going to read it for the first time with it all collected, and they're going to be like, "Oh my God, where has this been all my life?" But it's pretty fascinating how that works, where it's just like every new book is a reminder to a new generation and they could be reading this series. I mean, that was one of the coolest things in the build up to it was like, I think you shared this, there was a school that was doing like a wheel that they would spin to decide who in the class gets the 6 copies of the book that they got. And
Uh-huh.
it's such a big deal to the kids who just love it. But that group of kids were not even around when the series started, and they're still just like hyper passionate about it. And I don't know, you have this like multi-generational book that is pretty wild.
Yeah, I feel like in comics, people are often chasing things too much,
Sure.
whether it's chasing the money, or chasing the fame. I sense that, like, because I was around comic artists all the time going into the industry. I almost worked in Extreme, when I was in high school. And one thing that I think is a mistake is chasing the audience. You shouldn't chase the same audience member. People get obsessed with pleasing this one person that's been there for a long time and not thinking about that person's the next person in line. That next person in line will often just leave the line if they feel that they're not being served at all. And people don't see that person. They just don't think that person exists. This next person, the next generation, or a new reader. They're so hyper focused on attending to the needs of the first person. And I think that's really, that's something that maybe is good in a personal relationship and their family and things like that. But in terms of the business, it's really hard to operate like that because, you're putting a lot of pressure on that one customer or the few customers that they have. So it's like out of like kindness or like out of like a obsessive need to be kind to the first person that there a lot of people are shooting themselves in the foot, and so I always came into it with the mindset that I'm always writing for the newest reader because they're the next one up, and I hope that we continue to have new readers in general. I hope that humanity continues. I'm very positive about that. I love humans and I want more humans to exist and I want to write for them. And I think there's this idea that, oh, well then, but I don't want to write for young readers because it's not intellectually satisfying, or I'm not speaking to intelligent people. That's what I think some people believe that. And what to that I say, well, listen, when I was writing or doing stuff in the comics world, in that comic space, I'm writing for somebody who's probably my age. And they've already decided what their career was. And they're probably just regular folks, mostly like us, like just people just working a job somewhere. And in their free time, they went to the comic shop and they're getting their comics. Now, when you're writing and drawing for kids, that person might be the next president. It could be the people who will be the architect for all your surrounding area, the person who is building the building you are living in, the people who make your shoes, the people who make your clothing, the people who educate your children eventually at some point. And they will be reading your book at a time when they have unconditional love and and time to like spend with your stuff because they're kids and they don't have They don't have the responsibilities of real world stuff yet. It's like a time where they're going to take that with them and go, man, I remember what it was like to read Amulet, and it was so fun. I'm going to build this entire park here with this idea that it's going to feel like the Sharnon house or something, or, I want to be as brave as Emily. I want to I want to be a kind of person who will make those kinds of decisions, and that person becomes maybe the biggest CEO in the planet. And just you have to have vision, and that's what was always lacking in comics to me, is that people just lost vision. They were always chasing the thing in front of them, and they're chasing their own tail essentially. And then eventually people lose interest in that kind of material, no matter how skilled you are, no matter how much it works.
I do think that sometimes one of the things that people forget is that kids are smart. Kids know when they're being aimed at. And I think that can really affect things. But
kids are just I think that's what I'm saying, is that they're not kids. They're just young. They're us. They're young. and they're next up. And eventually we'll be too old to do anything.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. 2024 crowdfunding continues to roll on with Zoop. Now live is a career-spanning compendium by Bob Fingerman, with projects launching soon by Harley Quinn's Chad Hardin, 2000 AD's Jimmy Broxson, DC Comics' Chris Weston, and Prodigy Near Levy. When Zoop says there are more surprises in store, they mean it. This month is going to unveil a first in the crowdfunding space. To take part in all the fun, it takes less than 30 seconds to create an account. The e-commerce style checkout is easy and intuitive. You can add multiple rewards and add-ons into your cart, provide some info during checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. And of course, every creator appreciates your support. For creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop is currently open for submissions. Email them at hellowearezoop.com to start a campaign. And now, back to the show. One thing I think is interesting is, when this book started, I was a young buck. And I was, going out to bars and doing all this stuff like that. And now I got gray hair, Kazu. And I've changed a lot over the span of this book's.
You're doing pretty good.
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. But this side, it's coming. It's coming. I got my hair cut the other day, and it was just gray hair everywhere. But one of the things that I think is interesting, that's for me as a reader, and obviously you've changed a lot. But one of the things I think is interesting is, you come out with the Stonekeeper, and it sets the expectation for what the kind of feel of Amulet is. And as you've done this series, I'm sure you've kind of grown as a creator, and what you want to some degree has changed. Did you feel as you told these stories that you had to kind of stick to the original structure and idea and approach that you had, or did you kind of embrace the changes you felt as you went along?
Oh, I was embracing changes as I went along, for sure. Yeah. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been interested in working on it, honestly. What made it interesting was trying to find ways to get different things in there. I was just so into bicycles and bicycle designs. And I was like, how do I get bikes in here? I designed my own futuristic bike,
Yeah.
And it was fun to just have that in there. So I think with any series, you can bring in anything. And honestly, the weirder it is, the better, I think. It makes it even more interesting, when you throw that into the stew. And I want to create the next series is going to be open like that too. For me to just bring in whatever I'm thinking of in that moment, I can just bring it into it and make it work. Amulet is it's a little difficult because there's a ticking clock. There's a rescue mission at every point, and we're always running from one place to another. And that is something that I want to not do the next time. I would like to do something that doesn't have that clock, something that feels like you're just going into a place. You're going to a place like a story like Spider-Man, or something where you go to one place pretty much, and that you can always come back to.
That is one of the interesting things about a story like Amulet is one of my favorite things that you do, and I think this is just a lovely thing. I love when cartoonists do this, is you have the kind of interstitial traveling moments where it's like a double page spread and it shows like a larger environment and kind of slows the pace a little bit. And I think that's really lovely. But you don't have a lot of time to like luxuriate in a moment and really dig into some of the side characters, because by the end your cast is massive. Like I mentioned Leon earlier. Leon, I just want to give a quick shout out. The most shocking moment in the entire book, it relates to Leon. And I don't want to say what, but I suspect you know what it is. And when I won't get any further, but Leon, big shocker. But in the beginning of the book, he was a really big part of the story, and he was one of my favorite characters. But by necessity, he had to take a back seat as the story expanded.
Yeah.
When you were getting into Wave Rider, I don't want to make it seem like you just had this checklist or something like that, but did you have a list of beats you knew you wanted to fulfill and characters you wanted to give a moment to, almost as if you were giving readers a send-off along the way? Or was it more organic than that?
Yeah, yeah, and the Leon thing was always going to happen. That was
It was destined from the beginning.
Amy knew, so she had to approve of the design because I had to do multiple versions of that of what you're talking about. I don't want to spoil too much.
Yeah, yeah.
But I had to design the transformation, and she was excited about it because she wanted. You'll notice Karen has this look on her face like, ooh. Like,
oh my, can we take this one home with us?
I didn't realize. Yeah. So that was always going to happen. Like I've been telling people, like the two of the biggest inspirations for this particular story were films that Francis Ford Coppola made. Number one would be the Godfather trilogy, in that's one of the few multi-generational American films that I've seen. There's just so few where they talk about the like tiers of generations. They always just, it's always about the self. Like so many stories in American culture is about the self, like I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna make it, and it's gonna be me, and yeah, I'm gonna be a star, you know. And in The Godfather, there's like how does it relate to the family, and how does it relate to our family history and all that? And it's very rare, even though it's about crime. I don't see that too often, you know. So there's that, and then Captain EO with Michael Jackson, the ride at Disneyland, the 3D film that Coppola made, which he directed. A lot of people might not know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so you know, and that's just Michael Jackson going to a dark planet, and with the power of song and dance, he's like making it nice, you know. And Emily sort of is doing that in this story. And so I knew that like the characters would change and all that stuff would happen. Going back to your original question, though, I knew that I had to give some time to a lot of the minor characters that, you know, and give them some closure. There's one that I did miss, and somebody did point that out, and I'm sorry, because I always had it in mind to do a large Dagno. Dagno grown up as like a large wyvern with like, but then, you know, maybe it would have been too much like Bartleby.
Yeah, that's the tricky part.
Yeah, and so I didn't finish out that particular story. I didn't, and I think there must have been a reason, but maybe in a sequel. That maybe that's the time to see it. I think that'll be better if you see if there's a sequel series at some point that you see him return, Dagno return, and you see him as a majestic dragon, giant dragon. But you do get closure with the big one I thought was Enzo and Rico, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's a nice moment, and you know, and it just kind of, you know, just a good moment for kind of the working class of my story.
I feel like Enzo, though, he looked exactly like what I expected, because he kind of just looked like a non-cat version of himself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. With Leon, I had this like, oh, he's gonna be a young heartthrob, and I was like, wait, what? I mean, I guess in some ways still is, but it's just, anyways, they're live spoilers. But just a few more questions. I did want to get into spoiler territory a little bit, if you're okay with it. And I can tell people that they can skip forward a few minutes, but this beat was just too big, and it sort of feels like something that entered I don't want to say a bit later on, but like it was something that could have been part of the fluid development of the book. The final volume introduces machines from a parallel timeline that were created by Silas Sharnon and equals true identity that connects to those machines, and that he's a program. It's not just like this mystical entity. It has this Earth-based idea. What inspired that, and did those aspects of the story come in a little later on in the development process?
No, I've been interested in all this for a long, long time. In fact, in college, I even reached out to producer Walter Parks when I was doing research on AI in film. Walter Parks was the producer. Parks McDonald, they did like a lot of Spielberg stuff and everything, but they also produced War Games, and I felt like War Games was one of the first instances of seeing like the dangers of artificial intelligence in the world, and they did a really good job of making it super scary and interesting, and like all the elements of like our person, like Dr. Falcon's personal relationship with Jonathan to create the AI that is going to destroy our world. It came from a place where it was really just somebody wanting to bring life back into this world, that like to be a god essentially, because of heartache, because they were tormented, and in a sense I wanted that element in the story from the beginning, and Silas was always that guy, and he in some way managed to do a lot of what he was trying to do by creating Misket. More than anything, I think Misket is his like his best thing, the thing that he's made, because the Misket is kind of a catalyst for Emily and Navin's hero journey. Like without him, there's a lot that doesn't happen, but it's all just because he wanted to make some nice little thing for them, like a little toy.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was always kind of going to go back to that. Always about going back to the beginning in the story, and kind of like in Never Ending Story, so much of the fantasy, or even the Wizard of Oz, so much of the fantasy, is going to become essentially an allegory for our real times in our real world. And I think that's how people process these fantasies anyway. So I just made it text. I put it in the book now, and I'm just completing that cycle. It's really kind of a tradition more than it's like something that I was just hewing close to the lines that all of the greats have stayed on that road. I haven't deviated too much.
I was going to say, yeah, the Miyazaki part really kind of came full circle, because then you have, it's not said explicitly, but it just has an environmental feel to it, which is a constant in Miyazaki films. And I thought that was a really nice circle, because it's like in their own way they're trying to solve problems. I mean, that's one of the interesting things, is like the final book kind of does raise a question as to whether or not there's ever really a pure villain in a true sense, and
Yeah.
kind of not really.
No,
And
yeah, they're just people with problems.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, coming from different perspectives and different timelines and everything like that. But I did think one of the most interesting parts of the whole book was when, in the beginning of the book, it happens very early on, is Equal asks Emily whether she thinks that she can live peacefully on Earth after everything she's gone through. And I mean, it does kind of that Lord of the Rings thing of like, is Frodo gonna go to, I don't even remember the land that he goes to with the elves at the end
Grey
of the
Havens.
story. Yeah, the Grey Havens. Yeah, and it's just
Yeah.
like, how does the Chosen One move on after this? And I don't know. I don't want to get too far into the ending, but that is one of the interesting things. And one of the things I really like about stories like this is some people want what's next, but also the story will live on in your mind, and you can kind of imagine what happens with Emily after this. And I'm sure Emily, I felt that the ending was very poignant in how everyone else kind of immediately folds back into joking around and everything like that, but she's still thinking about where she came from, and it weighs on her. And Equal wasn't wrong.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. That's true, and the psychology of trauma, like she's essentially been traumatized more than others because of the responsibilities leveled on her shoulders. She's there when her dad dies. She's Naven's not, that was by choice. I wanted to make sure that he didn't experience the trauma the way she does, and I think that defines their approach to things. He's a lot more level-headed, like, that could be okay. And for her, there's something where she's like trying to stop something horrible from happening all the time. And that's, you're going to be left with that, of course, at the end of this book, because she's gone through so much, and more than Navin has gone through.
Navin just gets to go to like the world's coolest summer camp. I mean, in a lot of ways, he doesn't get all the trauma, and he gets to ride around in mechs with an awesome girl all the time. I mean, like everybody calls him Commander. I mean, like this is like a child's dream.
Yeah, he's the character that most people write when they do these things. And I guess it's kind of like in I love Big Trouble in Little China, right?
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite movies. And I love that. And I talked to John Carpenter about this because he was actually one of my teachers in college.
Oh, wow.
Like I had one class. He only taught one class, and I was in it. And I talked to him about and he was really happy about the ability to create the real hero of that movie is actually Dennis Dunn's character, right? It's not Kurt Russell.
Jack Burton.
Yeah, it's not Jack Burton.
Yeah.
It's his buddy, and we're just, but Jack Burton's our viewpoint, and he's just going on this journey, his buddy's journey.
Yeah.
And we as a movie audience are thinking that this is Jack Burton's story, but and it is his story. It's how it's gonna be seen through his eyes, but it's really a princess being, a damsel in distress, and the prince is gonna go and rescue his princess. It's really Dennis Dunn doing all of that, and we're just kind of like just adding to it. And I thought that was really, really interesting how he had written that, and it was really, I don't know, I loved it. I love everything about that movie.
Yeah.
And I think in a sense, Emily and Navin have a little bit of that too. You could give the wish fulfillment part of it, to somebody, but you don't have to. They don't have to be. They don't have to be the grand hero. They don't have. You don't have to have an all-in-one.
I mean, I think that's the nice thing about stories like this too, is like to some degree you start playing with expectations too, right? Where it's like, I read the first book and I think that Leon's going to be like a central figure throughout because he's like this swashbuckling, like super cool Fox character, and you're like, we got to find his journey. And then ultimately he isn't. And that doesn't make it wrong. That just means that other things kind of took priority. And just like with Navin, like Navin, you said is like typically the one you see, but I like that this story is about the complexity of Emily's journey and the trauma that she goes through, because that makes it a much more rich experience. I also like that, I mean, God, this is definitely in spoiler territory, but at the end of the book, when they get back and the car is there, it really contextualizes how long that they've been gone, that the battery is dead and that the tires are all flat. It's just, it's one of the things you don't really think of in the moment, but you're like, oh, they've probably been gone for a while. Like, what have they been doing on the other planet?
Yeah, yeah. And what's happened on Earth, right? We don't know. Yeah, that's like they could be coming into like a post-apocalyptic situation.
They're about to find out whenever they get over that hill. But to close, I do want to talk about some things about how it's changed for you. It's been a long series, 9 books, 16 years, just in releases. Obviously, it's been going longer than that. To say nothing of, the work that preceded it, but how do you feel you've grown over the series as a writer and artist? Because I think that's one of the things that's interesting. We talked about that already, where it kind of fed into the work, but can you feel like specific ways you've changed, or is it more about what you want than how you've evolved as a storyteller?
The most significant part has to do with Amy, my wife. I mean, she's been here the whole time during the entire process of making these books. And she is a very thoughtful person, a very thoughtful writer. Like the way she writes, there's a richness to everything that she wants to write. There's like a poetry, a meaning, literature, to it. And when I started, I was kind of just wanting to make an entertaining action thing. I just wanted to make it cool. I want to entertain. I just want to have it be bombastic and also suspenseful. And I was a film student, essentially. I was a student of the craft. But at the end of the journey, I've already done all the craft stuff. I feel like I have nothing to prove. I think that I like all the craft stuff that's been done, and I know people know I can do it. I don't need to prove anything to anyone, really. So it became more about, what do I want to leave people with? What is the reason for this? What is the legacy in terms of how people will utilize the book? Like often when I was making Amulet 8, I thought about the picture I had in my mind was, what if some point we're spacefaring, creatures, and we're off on another planet, and there's some kid that's on that ship and they can only bring 1 or 2 books with them. Can I make that book? Maybe it won't be all of the Amulet set, but just maybe they will pick Amulet 8 or something. I was thinking about that as I was drawing it. What would that kid in that situation, far away from their home world and probably scared out of their minds, what would be a really fun, comforting story for them in that moment? And so I think about things, and I contextualize the end user in a very different way than I did a long time ago. I don't think about, what would entertain them. I think about what can they use. So that's the difference between me then and me now.
I feel like if that person was in a, going to space and everything like that, could only bring one book, they could really use that one volume edition of Amulet at that point. And that's a huge cheat. That's a huge cheat. They don't even care if it's hard to get through. They're like, I get all 9 in one.
I don't think it could fit it on the shelf, though.
That's true. But
they should bring number 9. Bring the last one.
There we go. So you took on a massive series. You've quite possibly, I mean, it's funny to say you've made your magnum opus because that implies that whatever's coming next is not going to live up to it. But, you've done a massive project. I do think one of the things that's interesting is some might think that the natural inclination is to think small next. And what do I do that is not a 9-volume book, or what is not fantasy for you? Do you feel like the size and longevity and like the length of time you spent in this genre has changed what you want for yourself going forward, if at all? Like how you're thinking about your next projects?
I don't know. You do what you do.
You do what you do.
So I don't think so, David. I think I'm getting pretty ambitious, honestly. I'm just trying to find the right base for the next series. I do have a children's book that I'm working on that will be announced in a few days, I think, from when this podcast goes out. I don't know if I could talk about it here, but so I'm almost done with that. So I've been working on little things, the graphic novels. I did that gallery show for Gallery Nucleus. There's still some original pieces, very rare for me to sell any original anything. But if anybody wanted Amulet original things, there are watercolors and some work from the box cover art and everything like that for sale on their site at gallerynucleus.com. So things like that. I'm doing little things that just kind of warm up and experiment with how I want to produce the next series. The children's book that I'm doing is actually inked with with a quill. I haven't done that in a long time. My agent would like me to do all my stuff that way. She loves the way it looks, but it just takes too long. So I can't. I'm not going to do that for the graphic novel, but I could do that for individual images. So for the next series, though, it's actually a story that's a bit older than Amulet. It's something that I wanted to tackle. I wanted to tackle it before Amulet, but I just wasn't ready for it. It was too big and complicated. So I just shelved it and just practiced little stories with these characters over the years. But I haven't ever sat down to think about it as a graphic novel until now.
It's really amazing to think of something on the heels of Amulet that is bigger and more complicated than that was originally. Just from the outside. I mean, look at it now, you're like, 9 books. And then you realize that Amulet grew a lot since then. But at the same time, if that is like the big one, whew, I can't wait to see what that looks like.
Yeah, and I can handle a lot more now. I'm just glad that I thought of Amulet as something small when I started. It was supposed to be one book.
Yeah.
So it was supposed to be like a trial, like a me trying out this type of thing and paying tribute to my heroes in the process. And then this next series, it'll be a lot more me. Like it'll feel like I'm in there, in a way that I wasn't in Amulet. I felt like I was just caretaking for these characters that were part of my life a long time ago. And in a sense, it didn't feel like me when I did the books. If that might seem strange to people, but when I was doing it, I just felt like I was on the job. And that I just didn't have a lot of like who I am in these books. Yeah, but the next one, I'm definitely, Amy has like really pushed me to want to put myself in there a little bit more.
Well, I can't wait to meet you on your next series. But Kazu, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Amulet, the journey you had with that and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, I appreciate this. Thanks, David. This is nice.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Kazu Kibuishi. You can find him on social media at Bold City and his work in the Amulet series at Scholastic Graphix. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this one. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Kenny Myers, JKJ Art, Faith Aaron Hicks, Yeah Comics, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Danny Ollie, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Alan Ellsworth, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Travis Schmeiser, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Hull, Chris Doré, Near Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Jingo Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Orens, Capes and Tights Podcast, Claus Vandeven, Submit Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Power, Declan Shelby, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein-Q, Liana Kingus, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Stephen Hall, Philip Myra, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Walt's Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Demetriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gibb, Sean Kirkham, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwand, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Carl McMahon, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abbott, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote performed Off-Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.